All right, guys. I think we're ready to get started. People are still filtering in, but we can start with introductions. Appreciate everyone coming here. I'll say a little bit more about this in a second, but it's a pretty exciting time for a talk like this. So I think that anyone that's aware of this space knows what I'm talking about, at least. It's probably part of the reason why you're here. Real quick, my name is Buck. Dylan and I were both, can you guys hear me all right? Did I come in? We were both students here, seniors actually, exactly a year ago. And we actually first gave this talk in the second to last week of our senior portion. So this is a year anniversary of this talk. We've been doing it every 3 months since then. So I graduated in HR 40. I'm currently a UX engineer at a data science company called Yazdi. I'm also recently a contributor to a Bitcoin library called Bcoin. My background's in economics, and I first started getting interested in Bitcoin just because I was living abroad, and it was the easiest, cheapest way to transfer money between my account in the US and where I was in China. Let Dylan introduce himself.
Yeah, so I was on the 8th floor about a year ago. Buggo was on the 6th floor. Yeah, I'm a front-end developer at Walmart Labs. I studied philosophy and chemistry before I came to Hack Reactor. Read a lot of books in college, and kind of found out about Bitcoin around the same time as I decided to move away from liberal arts and kind of jumped into software engineering because of this technology. So I think you guys will see it's like really exciting. Yeah. Anyways.
Just capturing?
Probably.
Oh yeah, she started. Okay. Okay. So the way this talk is structured is I'm gonna talk a bit about sort of focusing mostly on Bitcoin and sort of the history of the space and where it came from, and introduce a little bit about sort of what the opportunities that leads into, and then Dylan will talk about sort of the space and blockchains in a more expanded light, sort of smart contracts, tokens, ICOs, a lot of the newer stuff that's coming along now. And so, as I mentioned, we first gave this talk a year ago, May 2016. The price of Bitcoin was $400 when we first gave this talk, and the price of Ethereum was around $10. And now, this number has been changing. I've had to change this slide several times in just the past week, but Bitcoin is now $2,500, and Ethereum is over $200. So if you take nothing else away from this, it's just, might want to pay attention. I don't know, maybe buy yourself a coin afterwards or something. But I just think this is so cool, and that number has been going in that direction every talk. So there's the ups and downs, but the general trend is that there's more and more adoption. There's more and more people that are building with it. There's more and more people that are using this technology. So it's something to at least have on your radar. Okay. So what is Bitcoin? That's basically the bit that I'm going to talk about, and then lead into the larger blockchain space. And my part is going to be structured sort of this way. So I want to first make the case that this is something worth paying attention to. Certainly when we first started a year ago, the idea, there's a lot of people like, oh, that's internet money. Oh, yeah, but there's no governments backing it. Or, I thought that was just something that people like gamers did with their GPUs. And so I just want to make the case that this is something that, is worth learning, is worth listening to. And then I think for anybody that's into the space, something that's sort of been lost is that there was a problem that Bitcoin specifically was trying to solve, and go over what that problem was, and then talk about how Bitcoin solves it. There's implications for the larger economy, for technology, for uses beyond currency. And then we'll move into the state of Bitcoin and blockchain today, and then blockchain beyond currencies, again, smart contracts, distributed DNSs, et cetera. Okay, so let's talk about why this is worth learning. So this is Mark Andreessen. Many of you are all in Silicon Valley, right? So this name might sound familiar to you. founder of Netscape. He's is the founding partner of Andreessen Horowitz, invested in tons of unicorns, kind of knows his stuff. This is Mark Andreessen sort of laying out the development of a revolutionary technology. And these steps, I think, are pretty important. I think we're sort of moving into some of the later steps now. So sometimes, so usually it starts off as a mysterious new technology. It seems new to people who haven't really been immersed in the sort of academics of it for years. And you see it, and it's like, oh, this seems kind of weird. But the reality is it's something that people have been working on for a really long time. And then you have the idealists that join in, right? You have with Bitcoin, it's the cypherpunks, and with computers, you also have the early cryptographers and people and code breakers, and everyone else sort of laughs it off. Again, drug money, or Silk Road. I heard about that. And then sort of the technologists, the people like us, people that come to Hacker, people that want to code, they start getting into it. They start there's people that are obsessed about this technology. Still a fringe. Then when it gets in the mainstream, it starts getting commercialized, and that's when you sort of have critical mass. And Andreessen posits, that happened with computers. You had that with the internet, right? Started with ARPANET. It was just a few servers in a corner of the country. And then in Bitcoin 2014 actually started much earlier than that, but that's when it started picking up steam. So to the first point about the decades of intense research, I think this is really important to keep in mind. This is not something that came from nowhere. Bitcoin was not just some, again, dream of geeks on the internet on some mailing list. This is something that had been being worked on for years and years. There were versions of electronic digital money starting back in 1983, eCash, including PayPal, which tried to make its own currency. And even somebody as visionary as Elon Musk, they had to drop it and decide, you know what, this is not feasible. We cannot do this. And then in 2008, someone called Satoshi Nakamoto, who to this day nobody knows who this person is, put out a white paper on a mailing list that was 9 pages long. And now the value of that technological innovation is worth over $30 billion. Okay, so the final point I want to make in terms of, whether or not this is worth thinking about, it's important to put the technologies that we take for granted, put them into perspective as well. This is a video from the Today Show in 1994. This is just a few years before Google started, before Amazon was founded, just a few years, right? And let's listen to how they talk about the technology that is in all of our pockets and has, made this project possible.
Back to 56 pence, I wasn't prepared to translate that as I was doing that little tease.
Oh, that's
that little
right.
mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard
Or
it.
around
I'd never
or
heard it
about.
said. I'd always
That's
seen the
right.
mark, but never heard
Yeah.
it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
Yeah, I heard be around
big
or
fight
about.
up in the lunchroom the other
See,
week.
there it is. Violence at NBC. GE com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what
do you
is
say to that,
internet
Allison?
anyway?
Internet is that
Massive computer
right,
network.
the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What is
What
it?
does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of started from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's
You
like
were
a
looking in the
computer
dictionary.
billboard.
It's not it's a computer billboard, but it's
Right.
nationwide. It's several universities and everything all joined together.
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
It
Just
came
great.
in really handy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating out to tell family and loved ones they were okay because all the phone lines were down.
I was telling Katie,
But you don't need that. You don't need a phone line to operate internet.
No.
So, I mean, I've been having these conversations for the past 2.5, 3 years since I got involved with it, right? It's like, yeah, you can't trust it, or, no one's going to want to use it if it's not backed by a government or backed by gold. So, yeah, what is internet anyway? Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the problem that was trying to be solved, right? And the name is a cryptocurrency, right? Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. Ethereum is above everything else, also a cryptocurrency. So money, what is money? And in economics and business, these are the main primary characteristics of money. It's got to be durable. You got to be able to, it's got to last. It's got to be divisible. You can have smaller units of it, portable, take it around. Non-counterfeitable. You have to know that, the unit that somebody gives to you is real. And fungible. So the dollar that's in my pocket is worth the same as the dollar in any of your pockets. This is what money should be to be effective. And this has been true and it's needed to be true for millennia. And as soon as it stops being true, we switch to a new system usually. Okay, so let's track the systems that we use to sort of achieve these ends. Actually, really before anything else, we had barter systems. You trade, I'll trade you my cow or some milk for a couple chickens or some eggs. That started to morph. You would have valuable items like shells maybe. But then we started to get to gold metal coinage for a variety of reasons. But the precious metals, one, they were portable. It was easy to carry around. Gold especially was very malleable, so it was easy to make into coins and transport it around and print your stamp if you were the Roman Empire, for example, and you wanted to know that this was a real good gold coin. But even that started to be a little bit cumbersome because, it's hard to carry around. So next, we used, starting over 1,000 years ago in Shanxi in China, deposit receipts, right? So you take your gold coins, you put it in with some institution that says, yeah, I'm going to protect it. Here's a receipt that says you are the owner of, the 1,000 gold coins that you left with me. And then that receipt can actually start to be traded around, right? You can say, okay, I am good for 1,000 gold coins. This person will give it to you if you have this receipt. That transformed into redeemable notes. Right? So now, okay, I trust that the gold is in the Federal Reserve or the central bank, and this note, backed by the trust of whatever government you're part of, is redeemable for this gold if you ever wanted to go to the Federal Reserve. Up until about, in the US, it stopped in the early 1900s where you could actually take your note, go to a bank, and get gold for it. And you had to legally be given that. That then transferred to fiat currency. We went from trusting that the government's going to have that gold for us or the bank is going to have gold for us to just say, you know what, we are backing this currency with the good faith of name your government. It's not backed by anything except for that good faith. It's a fully just trusted system. You have to trust for the system to work in order for that piece of paper to have any value. And that's been the standard since 1973. So this is, in fact, the system that we use today is very new. It's very experimental in the grand scheme of things. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. But of course, we didn't stick with just paper, right? Most of us probably barely have any paper money in our pockets or purses right now, right? We're using credit cards, we're using Venmo, PayPal, whatever. So how did that come about? It's because instead of carrying around a bunch of cash, just like the gold coins that became cumbersome to carry around, you certainly can't transact with notes across the internet. So instead, we keep track of ledger, right? So Alice and Bob are the typical characters used in cryptography problems, and so here we have Alice, who has her ledger where she's subtracting 100 units of whatever currency she's dealing with in order to send Bob 100. And so their ledgers then change. Now, Bob has no way to know, he has no reason to trust that Alice actually has those 100 units credited to her ledger. So we have institutions that verify, right? You don't go to Alice and say, hey, can you tell me how much is in your bank account? Can you just subtract 100 from that, and I'll just add 100 to mine, and we'll call it a day. No, we have banks that take care of those ledgers, and they settle these accounts for us. Typically, they're not dealing with the actual transfer between them. They're not calling up the other bank. So we have yet another system on top of that, whether it's PayPal, Venmo, Swift, Visa, MasterCard, the credit cards that you have in your pocket. And this is done for millions upon millions of different ledgers across many different systems. And it goes in both directions. A lot of these systems these settlements don't happen immediately. They tend to happen, you'll have settlements in some systems every 2 weeks, approximately. Okay, this works really well, right? I think the question is, why do we need all this? I think for most of us, we understand why we need all this. It comes down to trusted third parties, and the services that they provide are convenience, right? We can transact online, security. I don't have to hold my funds. I don't have to it's an insurance in case someone breaks in your home. The banks are federally insured as well. They also have the benefit of scale, right? Like you can find a bank or an ATM on every corner. They can build out the app so that you can interact online. But they do introduce some risk. There's bureaucratic overhead. We have to pay for these services, even if you're not seeing the fees related to the credit cards because you're paying off your bill each month. Merchants have to pay credit card processing fees. Banks have to pay the SWIFT networks that are helping them settle this. There's a lot of overhead in terms of people that you have to hire. Centralized vulnerabilities. If one of these systems gets hacked, everybody who uses these systems is vulnerable, right? SWIFT is one of the more recent ones where they got hacked for several $1 million. Or if your credit card information is with Target or Yahoo, all this stuff, vulnerable. Limited accessibility as well. This is not so important for us, but if you're living in a poor area in the middle of the country, or even if you're rural America to rural South America or Africa, it doesn't really make sense for Bank of America to open up a branch there. So this has its drawbacks as well. Okay. Now, this is an engineering school, and as I promised, this is an engineering problem that has been worked on for at least a few decades now. And from an engineering standpoint, what's going on here is something that was defined as the Byzantine generals problem, also known as Byzantine fault tolerance. And before getting into the technical aspects of this is a pretty easy metaphor that's used to describe it, which is where the name comes from. So the idea here is that let's say you have two generals on either side of a valley, and they want to attack a town that's in the center. Now, given the size of the forces and the intel that they have on the town in the center, they know that if one of the generals were to take their army and attack alone, they would lose. But if they were to attack at the same time, they would win. But the problem is that any messengers that they send from one to the other, because they're on opposite sides of the valley, has a risk of being intercepted. So any message that you as a general receive from the other general, you can't know if it's from the town that's trying to trick the generals to attack at different times and thus win the battle, or if it's actually from your general. So this is fundamentally a problem of trust. If you can't trust that third party, you can trust, and you don't even necessarily know if you can trust the other person on the other side. Maybe that person's already gone and they're sending a message. So all you know is what you personally know. So how do you deal with this problem? And then how does this apply to money? So here we have Alice and Bob again. And now we're dealing in the digital world, right? You want to buy a good digitally. You want to buy a CD, or you want to order something online, or you want to pay somebody for their contracting services, or send money to friends or family, or between your own accounts in US and China. We have this problem with this network in the middle. We have no idea what's going on with it, right? We don't know if it's getting intercepted. We don't know if it's a real message. We don't know if Alice actually has those credits, or if it's even Alice sending the message. So the way we deal with this is all these systems. So we deal with the problem of trust by putting our trust in these centralized institutions. And for the most part, it's worked pretty well, right? I mean, it's more or less built, certainly this industry that we're in, and it's done a lot of other good as well. But there are all of those other risks that I pointed out, and there's also places where these systems don't work out so well. Talk to anybody from Argentina or Greece or Venezuela, or had family in Germany in the 30s, or certain European Union countries right now. So enter Bitcoin. So in 2008, as I said, there was somebody, or really just an identity online, that went by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, that published a 9-page white paper. pose a solution to the Byzantine generals problem. It's titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. You can look it up. It's a pretty quick read. Pretty easy to follow. It's not very heavy in the math yet in the early stages of the white paper. Now, what Satoshi did was not particularly, none of the actual concepts were particularly new or revolutionary. There had been, as I mentioned, they had been being worked on for many decades, but he sort of brought them all together. I'm going to say he just for convenience, and it's typically the pronoun that's used, but Satoshi put these three main ideas together. First, use public key cryptography, and I think by now maybe all of you guys have gone through the sprints where you deal with public and private keys and hashing algorithms, right? Where you keep a private key to yourself, and you put a public key out there. You can prove that you sign the public key, and only the person with that private key could have resulted in the full signature, right? Then there was proof of work, and this is basically throwing computing power at a hashing problem to validate that you did some work to get there. So you publish the result of the hashing algorithm that your computer system did. And finally was the public ledger, which we now know as the blockchain, or goes colloquially by the blockchain, or at least in its iteration in Bitcoin. And I'll go into this a little bit more in a bit, but the idea behind this is, instead of those separate ledgers, everybody can see the entire ledger of every transaction that's made on, at least in the Bitcoin blockchain. And that, along with these other aspects, removes the necessity for this trust, right? Because you don't have to trust somebody else that they're giving you their right value that they have on their ledger, because you can see their ledger. It's verifiable. The result, as it says here, is a decentralized, distributed, and near trustless verification network. Okay, so let's talk about how it works visually. Or no, not visually yet. So public key cryptography, I mentioned that. There's way more that goes into the public key system in Bitcoin, but usually if you've ever transacted with Bitcoin, someone says, hey, you can send me some funds here. Here's my public address. And what you do if you want to send funds is you have to sign a transaction with your private key to verify that at some point somebody sent you enough funds that you have those funds available. And use the SHA-256, which we use very commonly in the tech world. So proof of work, one-way hashing algorithm hashes a block of new transactions with a hash of all of the previous transactions ever made. So I'll try not to go too deep into this. If you have questions about the details after, I'd be happy to talk more. But there's books that are written about this now. But the idea is that what happens is that these miners that you might have heard about take transactions that are being thrown out into the network. They put them together, basically shove them into a JSON object. They have some other information that's associated with the block. And then what they do is they take the hash result of the previous block, put that into their block, and then do proof of work. Basically, they have to they hash and hash and hash until they come out with a result that has a certain number of zeros, a salt at the beginning, a nonce at the beginning of their of the resulting hash, right? What's important about this and how it's a verifiable history of all transactions ever made is because of that previous hash, right? So if I've done that hashing and I've hashed out my block, now my block has a hash that includes a hash from the previous block, and so on and so on and so on. That's where the chain comes from. And if you were to change one bit in any of those previous transactions, any of those previous blocks, it would change the outcome of the hash of that latest block, and you can prove that that's not a real chain, that somebody tried to forge it. So that's proof of work. I hope that was clear. Finally, what this produces is a public ledger. It's a single immutable history of all transactions ever made, which we now know as, in the Bitcoin world, the Bitcoin blockchain. And it's immutable because once you've gone several blocks deep, the work to reverse a hash and imitate it with your own becomes exponentially harder. until you get to a point where about 10 blocks in, it's almost impossible to reverse. And once you get into 2 weeks, it's like all the computing power ever combined in the world. Like, it's just not going to happen. So, visually, how does this work? Now, we don't have our two ledgers anymore. Instead, again, just a JSON object. If Alice wants to send value to Bob, she has an input where she says, okay, I have these transactions that were previously sent to me, so I have this value. And I'm going to send X amount as an output to Bob, to hit the address that Bob gave me. And then Alice is going to sign it with her private keys to say that I promise that I am the only person that can have access to these funds, because only this private key could produce this correct digital signature. Now, Bob can't be totally sure that that's the correct signature, so Bob will send that transaction out to the network. It gets picked up by a miner who packages it up together with a bunch of other transactions, adds it to the blockchain, and once that miner has solved the proof of work algorithm, then the miner will send it out to the network, and that work will then get verified by nodes, and also picked up by other miners who will attach their next block, their own block, onto the last miner's block. Now, something I haven't talked too much about, but one of the reasons why miners will do this work, because it costs a lot of electricity now, is because there's transaction fees, so you can pay a miner to include your transaction in the block. There's also a mining reward, and this is Bitcoin's inflation system, their money creation system. So in every block, there is newly minted Bitcoin that's also included. So the miner can have an output to their own address that was never transacted before. And this is allowed through the source code, which is open source. And this reward in Bitcoin is halved every 4 years. So it's a deflationary system. So when it first started, every 10 minutes, when you would have a new block, the miner who found the block would get rewarded with 50 Bitcoins, and then 4 years later it was 25, and now the reward is 12.5 Bitcoin. And on and on and on until approximately 100 years from now, where the last fraction of a Bitcoin will be mined, until we have a total of just about 21 million Bitcoin. So it's a deflationary system. Okay, so what does this all come down to? Does this answer the question that I posed at the beginning? So what Bitcoin is a completely decentralized network of computers that compete against each other every 10 minutes to solve a math problem, acting in their own economic self-interest to verify and propagate a single public ledger, a single source of truth for the entire history of all transactions ever made on the network. And all this together creates, for the first time, an instance of digital scarcity, right? If everybody can, in a trustless manner, verify that you are the only owner of a certain coin, you've now created scarcity in a world. In the digital world, there was no scarcity before, right? Like, as soon as a song went public online, you could copy it, and okay, there was some programming that could try and lock that in, but that gets blocked, and you have legal enforcements, whatever, to keep it in. This is the first time digitally you can have actually real scarcity. You can now have digital pieces of artwork. You can verify that a piece of artwork is unique to the one that the author put out into the digital world. And what this has now created is a computing network that is 43,000 times larger than the world's 500 most powerful supercomputers combined. So take the supercomputer that's in China, take the US government supercomputer, take Google supercomputers, Facebook supercomputers, put them all take all 500, put them together, the Bitcoin network, which is distributed, which is in all of those countries and more, 43,000 times larger, their computing power. So, tells you a little bit more. Hopefully we're a little bit past this stage now. And you see that there's a value, right? But of course we have to get past this stage with the internet. And once we got past that stage, the internet clearly transformed our world. And I would posit that what it offered us was the democratization of value, of information. So what was the world before the internet? Well, information, you'd get it from books, newspapers, the radio, eventually TV. But all of these came from central repositories, right? There was only a couple trusted news sources on TV. You know, everyone would watch Walter Cronkite or whatever. You had a couple big newspapers plus your local newspapers. And there we all were on the other side of it, right? Then the internet came along and, well, it didn't get rid of those third parties, but it also gave us the opportunity to be on the other side of that relationship. It allowed anybody to not just be a receiver of news and information, but to deliver it. You didn't have to be an individual that managed to get onto TV or onto radio in order to get your message out to anybody that wanted to read it. So it democratized information. It gave us all the ability, and it very remote, you know, poor, low access to even roads where you can get access to this information now. Bitcoin really just did the same thing with value. Where you had we still have the third parties, even the Bitcoin world, there's trusted third parties, but it also allowed you to transact digitally, especially, without those trusted third parties. And even in the world of gold, the empires of Rome, of Persia, of the United Kingdom, those grew because they had the most trusted mints. If you saw the emperor's face on a gold coin, it was minted by the Roman Empire, you could trust it. That meant that Roman merchants could trade anywhere in the hemisphere, and they could trust that coin. But then those mints could also take advantage of it, right? So what ended up happening is inflation in those worlds was the governments, when they ran out of money, would start shaving little bits of gold off of the sides of the coin. They would melt that down and make more gold, make more gold coins, put the face on, and they got away with it for a little while until people didn't trust it anymore. This allows us to completely get around that, digitally or otherwise. It allows for trustless electronic transfers, as I mentioned. It removes bureaucratic overhead necessary to maintain credit card and other verification networks. So, you know, I mentioned that the costs that merchants have to pay to credit card companies or even banks have to pay to SWIFT networks. No chargeback risk for merchants. You know, if you cancel a charge on your credit card because it was stolen, merchants actually have to swallow that cost. And it's estimated that about 10% of all our consumer goods have that priced in. It's transparent, predictable, and a depoliticized money supply. Most people, certainly in the West, are pretty happy. They don't think the politicization of money supply is too important. But again, it's a risk. And it's something that, you know, what a lot of people don't realize is that, you know, a single turn of phrase by Janet Yellen when she reveals the minutes from the latest meeting can affect markets, right? Because what they're going to do with the money supply affects so many other aspects of our economy and our lives and our politics. And then finally, and this is going to lead into Dylan's portion, programmable money. Right, this is sort of the amazing, incredible byproduct afterwards. When you can program your money, you can lock funds away, not based off of who has a who has a key, but you can also lock in based off of time. You can have multiple holders of private keys to say that, for example, if you have business partners and a lawyer that say you need at least 2 out of the 3 people, the business partner and or the lawyer, to sign to release funds from a transaction. You can just code that up. So again, I mean, I think I've been kind of hammering at this point, but, you know, things are working kind of well now. We like to think, you know, PayPal, Venmo, these things are pretty convenient. So why does this matter? Well, I mean, I think really if you accumulate all the different things that have been happening, certainly over the past couple years, even the past few months, there's a lot of risk that's priced in. There's a lot of centralization of risk. There's a lot of centralization of power. There's a lot of also just innovation that could be unlocked once anybody in this room could program a contract, can program their money, can be in control of their own money. And again, Greece is an EU country. And you could not access your bank accounts for 2 weeks. PayPal was not allowed to operate in Greece, in a European country. If you were a citizen of Cyprus with over $100,000 of funds in your account, you had 10% of your value wiped away Because the government was out of money, they just took it out of the bank account. Instead of trusting the third parties, instead of trusting the governments, no matter how well they might be working out, we can trust code. You can go to GitHub. You can go to github.com/Bitcoin/Bitcoin. You could look at the code. That's running a $30 billion economy right now that started from nothing but a couple servers in some guy's garage. And other people built on top of it. You can propose your own protocol changes. You can fork it and start your own currency, which they have. Now we have Ethereum. Now we have Zcash, Monero, on and on and on. And then tokens built on top of that. So that leads us to blockchains beyond currencies. And Dylan's going to talk a little bit about this, but you can just see some of the things that can now be done in a decentralized way, in a verifiable way, in an open source way, and in a distributed way. And the opportunities that it's going to bring about are, at least some of us in this room believe, are going to change the world. So that's my portion. I'm going to hand it over to Dylan, and then we're going to hang around.